this conservative guy and all that, but I was a grassroots organizer, really more interested in Republican politics than I was in Republican policy, and worked very, very hard on a lot of levels until I ran for Congress. I decided I didn't like my congressman, didn't know enough not to run, and I was up against a 14-year incumbent in a 60% Democratic district in a bad election year, and we out and ran anyway, and I went out and knocked on doors. All of you know that. I mean, that's the way you get started in politics, at least for most people. Not all, but for most people. You get started by the grassroots. And I'll share a story that hopefully you can relate to. It was my first campaign. I was campaigning in Upper St. Clair. I'd gone to a neighborhood. It's one of those neighborhoods where there's one entrance and one exit, and it was a nice little layout. You could sort of work one side of the neighborhood and then work your way all the way back around, and it was a great afternoon knock in the middle of a hot August day. And so I'm working the neighborhood. I'm about halfway through, and I knock on the door, and a woman comes to the door, and I say, "Hi, I'm Rick Santorum. I'm running for Congress." And she looks at me, and she has this little dog yelping around her feet, and she looks at me and says, "Oh, you look so warm. It was a hot day." And she said, "Why don't you come in for a glass of water?" Well, of course, you know that as a door knocker, you don't go in and spend a lot of time. You sort of have to hit your doors, right? And I said, "No, thank you very much." And she insisted, and I thought, okay, I'm going to probably save more time just going in and having a glass of water than I am standing here arguing with her. So I walk, and she, "Oh, why don't you come in and sit down?" Well, of course, you walk in, but you never sit down. And she said, "No, I insist." I said, "Okay, I know where this is going, so okay, I'll come in and sit down." So she runs off and gets a little glass of water for me, and as she's walking back, the dog's running ahead of her, jumps up and hops on my lap. And so what do you do when the dog hops in your lap? You pet the dog, right? And you just sit there and you pet the dog, and she hands you the cup of water, and I take the glass of water, and I get this warm sensation in my lap. And so I jump up, and on my khaki pants is this large, warm urine wet spot. And I jump up, and she looks at me, she goes, "Oh, let me get that," and she reaches for my... So I jumped back and I said, "No," I said, "That's fine, I'm really good." And she said, "Well, I have a hair dryer, let me blow it dry." So that's not going to work either. And then she goes, "Well, you can take them off and I can put them in the dryer." And, all these wonderful suggestions, but I just quickly said, "No, thank you very much, I've got to go." And so I scurry out of the house. Now, all you fellow door knockers, what do? You're halfway through the neighborhood. You're a good 25-minute walk to your end, and you lose the rest of the day, right? It's hot, it's dry, so you figure, what? Soldier on, right? Very few people are home, not a big deal. By the time I get to a few more houses, it'll dry enough that no one will notice. So I look at my sheet, and I see the next person is a guy. If you're from Pittsburgh, you know this name. This person is a famous person in Pittsburgh, a guy named Kent Tekulve. Now, Kent Tekulve was the closer in the 1979 World Champion Pittsburgh Pirates, who's now an announcer for the Pirates. And so I thought, August, Pirates, I don't even know whether they were in town or not, but I thought, what's the chance of him? Easy one. I'll just go there, sign a little note, and put it in the door and move on. So I walk up, knock gently on the door, because I don't want to be too loud, and I start writing, "Sorry I missed you," and the door opens. And there in front of me is Kent Tekulve. And so he's got a screen door between me and him. So I take I open up the door a crack and try to hand this around as I'm saying, "Hello," and he pushes the door open. And he does this. And I look up at him and I say, "Mr. Tekulve, I'm so excited to meet you." So just a little word of advice, if that ever happens to you, how to deal with those situations. I got his vote. I think he still votes for me today. So I want to share with you that, that's where I come from. My roots are just going out there working the grassroots. And as you know from my announcement on Wednesday, when I announced a couple of Wednesdays ago in Butler, Pennsylvania, on a factory floor. That's how I grew up. I grew up in a factory town. I grew up in Butler. I grew up among folks who went out and worked with their hands for a living. And we're very proud of the communities that they built and the country that they had built. And As you know, you heard Joyce talk about a book I wrote last year called Blue Collar Conservative. That wasn't a book about just what our plan is for the future, which it was. It's also about what I've been doing in my political career to try to help the men and women in this country that I believe that I would argue that both political parties have forgotten about. The working men and women in this country who built this country, who want to continue to build this country and make things. But we have both political parties not really focused on what we can do to put them back to work. We tend to focus on, as Republicans, we tend to focus on, and it's a good thing, small business people. I love small business. I run a small business. But it is a message to a very small group of people. Do you know what percentage of Americans are small business people or even run or own their own business? Less than 10%. And yes, that's our message. 90% of people work for those businesses and other businesses and agencies. And we go out and talk as if all we care about are the folks who are entrepreneurs and growing the economy. They're important, but it's not a particularly strong election strategy. I know there's a lot of talk about, why we lost the last election and, the evangelical vote didn't come out or this vote didn't come out. But if you look at the subsequent analysis now that they've done over the past few years since 2012, you know what they found out? And particularly in northeastern United States. You know who didn't turn out? Blue-collar workers didn't turn out. They didn't turn out because they know Barack Obama and the left don't care about them. They don't care about them because they're shutting down the manufacturing jobs with all of their crazy environmental policies. They're shutting them down with big government and higher taxes. They know this. They're shutting them down and creating a much more difficult time for them because we brought in 35 million legal and illegal immigrants, almost all of whom are unskilled, into this country to flatten out wages. The Democrats, who used to be the party of the working person, don't care anymore about working men and women. Oh, they'll say they did. Look at their policies. Look at the policies they have and how they crush hardworking Americans. And you know what? Young, hardworking Americans have figured this out. The problem is they look to us and they say, well, you guys don't care about us. At the last convention, I spoke on Tuesday night and I walked out on the stage, walked out in the arena before the event to do a little prep, to do the lighting for you during the day. And I saw on all the chairs a sign that said, "We built that." At the national convention, we spent an entire night having small business person after business person walk out there on stage and talk about how the president was wrong when he said you didn't build that. Not one time did that small business person walk out there with an employee. Walk out there with a worker and say that we built that. You see, we are not a party anymore of big business and Wall Street. That's not who we are. You may think from reading the Wall Street Journal but that's not who we are. Look at Pennsylvania. Last time around, when I first ran in 1994, how did you win Pennsylvania, Rob, back in 1994? He remembers you lost the city of Philadelphia maybe by 200,000 votes or so. You lost southwestern Pennsylvania, the whole area down there. You could try to hold that down to 150,000. And then you'd offset that vote with winning the Philly suburbs. You had 4 counties in the Philly suburbs offset Philadelphia. You'd probably lose up to the Northeast, and you'd offset it by the rural areas. That's how you won. You can't win that. How do you win Pennsylvania anymore? Why? Because you lose the Philly suburbs. Those wealthy areas that no longer vote Republican anymore. But what do you win? You win all of southwestern Pennsylvania except for the city. All of those blue-collar workers have moved. Why? Because the Republican Party in Pennsylvania is smart enough to figure out how to win elections. And so we nominate people who talk about working men and women. In fact, they are working men and women. I remember last time when I ran in 1994, well, actually all 3 elections, I was lucky to get 35% of the vote in counties along the West Virginia border. Now they all elect Republican congressmen and senators, state senators, and House members. Why? Because we're smart enough to figure out that the Republican Party is different. The Democratic Party has left working men and women. And with that, a tremendous opportunity for us to go out and put forth an agenda that says, we are still the Republican Party that understands how America works, which is growth and opportunity. And so the Republican message for the last 35 years has been a good message. It talks about lower taxes and less regulation, limited government, more freedom and opportunity. That is absolutely right on. It's a message that will resonate, but it's not sufficient.